Welcome to Frontline Voices, a podcast series brought to you by Stanford University's Hoover Institution, exploring leadership, service, and solutions to some of our nation's most pressing issues. I'm your host, Iron Mike Steadman, a Marine Corps veteran and former Hoover Veteran Fellow. In this inaugural episode, I'm joined by Gregory Eason, a Hoover Veteran Fellow alumni, Naval Academy graduate, and former naval officer, working to provide affordable housing solutions in his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, through real estate development. I brought on Greg to help introduce me to you all, our listeners. As a host of this series, I think it's important you have an understanding of the lens through which I approach life and see the world, based off of some of my own lived experiences. We discussed the theme of normalizing excellence and what it realistically takes to raise and maintain standards of excellence, however we define them in our own lives. I open up about being raised in a single-parent home without a father, the realities of young men who grew up in environments like mine, and despite a challenging childhood, how I still managed to persevere through it all to become a successful entrepreneur and change maker. I know this is going to be a bit different from some of the shows you typically find on Hoover's portfolio, but I'm excited to hear your feedback and look forward to knowing what you think. So enjoy. Greg, my brother, so happy to have you for this inaugural episode of Frontline Voices. How's it feel to be guest number one?
Absolutely. It feels good. I'm glad that, the platform is here and, I'm excited to see where you take it and, the things that we'll learn about you in today's session.
First, I want to just acknowledge Stanford University's Hoover Institution for allowing us to have this platform to introduce a new lens of commentary from American veterans and those of you out there on the front line solving our world's most pressing issues. And really excited to do this. It's been a while since I don't want to say hosted a podcast, but yeah, actually that's what it is. It's been a while since I've personally hosted a podcast myself. I kind of took about a 1.5-year break, and it feels good to kind of shake the cobwebs off and get back in the fight. And, for this inaugural episode, I wanted to bring Greg on because Greg and I have both had the privilege of being alumni of the Hoover Veteran Fellowship program. And I just thought it'd be great to have Greg on here to help introduce me to you who are listening that might not be familiar with kind of my background and why I'm hosting this platform in the first case, and also why I'm so excited about the program in general and sharing these voices and sharing this commentary that we're going to be able to bring to those of you that are tuning in. So Greg, let's start by just kind of having you introduce yourself first, what even brought you to be a part of the Veteran Fellowship program in the first place, and then I'll let you take the reins and interview me a bit.
Yes, absolutely. I'm Greg Eason, and, truly what brought me to the Hoover Veterans Fellowship program is first Mike Steadman, but secondly, my commitment and passion to providing affordable housing with churches being the conduit. In 2022, I got back to Atlanta and I was working as a real estate development manager. And as I, continued to be a part of the men's ministry at my local church and then branch out to ministries and the churches that are a part of our conference in the AME church, a lot of pastors started to come up to me and say, hey, my church has underutilized land, and we know that there's an affordability crisis. And for some flavor, in Atlanta, if you're a child born into poverty in Atlanta, you stand a 1 in 20 chance of escaping poverty. And so that's less than 5%. And it's the worst chances of escaping poverty out of any major city in the United States. And poverty is often defined by the environment that you live in. And what we've seen in Atlanta is a lot of intense, what people call capital A affordable housing, which is where you have a concentration of low income housing. And that hasn't been fruitful for those communities. And so what we've seen is we are able to tie housing into some of those greater personal goals. At the Naval Academy, we called it the 3 missions: the mental, the physical, and the moral. Well, when you have a church right by your housing, the church helps to provide a lot of that mental and moral compass for the people who are in the housing. And we believe that when churches have the economic resources to do good, positive outcomes will follow. And the Hoover Institution has been a very good place for me to kind of workshop the problem that we're solving and band together with other people in the space who are trying to solve the problem of affordable housing.
That's amazing. And I can't think of anything that can destroy someone mentally, physically, and spiritually as being what we call housing insecure these days.
Absolutely.
And, there's a stereotype of like the homeless veteran, but it's a real thing, and I've been surprised even in, my understanding what housing insecurity is, because you go to a place like the Naval Academy, you serve your country, become an officer, and you assume that the homeless veteran is on drugs or something like that.
Yeah.
Life's, people get laid off, people go through divorces, they have all kind of issues, and it just destroys them. And so I think it's great about what you're doing, and I think it's a real problem, particularly, as the cost of living continues to rise, especially in our inner cities. And people are just trying to make it. So I'm really glad to have you on here and even unpack that a little bit more.
Absolutely. But, I would like if you could tell me, a little bit more about your upbringing and your background, and kind of let's go all the way back to before you decided to go to the Naval Academy, and kind of what were the things that, shaped you into the person who wanted to attend a service academy?
It's a great question. So I was born and raised in Tyler, Texas. My mom, Willeen Steadman. I have never met my dad, so I believe his name's Carl, but I was raised in a single parent home. Had a loving, supportive family, grandparents or grandmother. My grandfather had passed away before I was born, and that church family, St. Louis Baptist Church. My grandfather was a pastor, and so he pastored at St. Louis, and so we had a strong church community there in Tyler. And so when I was a little boy growing up, deacons from the church would come pick me up and take me to get a haircut. And I know that sounds I cannot stress even now, kind of looking back on it, it makes me a little bit emotional, because just being a young man, growing up in that environment, nobody wants to sit at the barbershop with their mom on Saturday morning, especially getting those first few haircuts, etc. And so to have men in the community kind of step up, and many of them were actually military veterans. Wilbur Chris from the Korean War was one.
Yeah.
Sadly, he passed away, I think back in 2017. But he'd come pick me up, take me to get a haircut and stuff like that. And so community was always a part of my upbringing. But I bounced back and forth between Tyler, Texas, where my grandma lived, and my aunts and uncles, and Bryan, Texas, where I actually ended up graduating high school. So I spent 2 years in Tyler. Then 4 years in Tyler, then 4 years in Bryan, Texas, then 4 years in Tyler, and then 4 years at Bryan, Texas. And mainly it was because of my mom's job. She was a special education teacher, worked her way up to special education director, and then we had to bounce around a little bit. I growing up and not having that kind of, father figure in the house, you start to create your own kind of version of different males that you look up to. And a friend of mine was named Jason McKinley, and our parents worked together in Bryan. And when Jason was a senior, I was a freshman in high school, and he decided to join the military after, graduation. And so because I looked up to Jason, and he literally taught me how to shave, when he decided he wanted to go to the military, I said, I want to go to the military. But my mom, growing up and, being an educator, it was real important for her to push me to go get my education. And so that's how I discovered about, ROTC, started doing some research there. Texas A&M was in our backyard, and it had the Corps of Cadets. And then I got exposed to the Naval Academy just by a random, English class where our teacher made us present our kind of 5 and 10 year plan. And I was a sophomore at the time. And the person that went ahead of me, he talked about this thing called the Naval Academy. And at the time, I was standing up saying I was going to go to Texas A&M, do the Corps of Cadets. Back then, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, even though I couldn't swim. But
Don't
once
we
I
all?
found out about the Naval Academy, I got curious. He just so happened to have a brochure. He let me take it home. And then that's how I kind of fell down that rabbit hole of the Naval Academy. People ask me this question a lot, though, about what led me to do military service. And I think for me at the time, it was an aspirational identity, right? And I think it even applies to my boxing background, where there was a poster of, like, you see the special forces, or you see the Marines or the Navy SEALs, and you're like, I don't know what they have, but I want it. Like,
Yeah.
they just look so confident, right? And you can see it. And then you're like, I want to get what they have. And so you start doing your research and you end up joining the military. And then one day you look up and you become that Marine infantry officer. You become that kind of combat veteran. And it's all very surreal now. But that was one of the things is, I didn't grow up with a lot of confidence. I grew up being labeled at-risk youth, fatherless home, all those different things. But there was something about that service member that eluded confidence. Even though I had never met them, you see the posters, whatever, but then you start to go to the events, the college events, you start talking to recruiters, and they kind of have a swagger about them.
Yeah.
Especially the Marines. Marines are suited and booted. And so I wanted that. And that's what kind of nudged me to go down that pathway. I will say too, I grew up with my mom and my sister. And my sister did end up going to college. She went to UT. But yeah, I grew up in a single parent home, seeing my mom fight like hell to keep us out of trouble and, on the straight and narrow path, because in the environment I was in, there wasn't too many male figures around. Everybody I knew lived with their grandma, their aunt. My high school basketball coach, Coach Jones, him and I are like this,
Wow.
because it really was like, I don't know how to say this. It's my first time trying to articulate this, but like one to many, essentially what it was. You had a lot of fatherless athletes, fatherless kids at my high school, but our coach, he was like a father figure to like 50, especially on the basketball team, because you had freshmen, you had sophomore, you had, JV, and then you had varsity, and we all looked up to him in that regard. And so seeing that, kind of being exposed to that early, that feeling of like, you're responsible for other people, you're responsible for your community, whatever that community is. That's how I grew up. And so that's kind of been a core part of my philosophy in life. I call it lifting as I climb. And my mom, she was a big part of that as well.
Yeah. And since we're on the topic of, having a male role model, even though, for you didn't have the father in the home, what would you say to like, as a younger self, to your future self, when you think about, having a family? I mean, you turned out excellent. You didn't have a father in the household, but like, can you express some of the things that you probably wish you could have learned from the father? Or, you know, is there any things that you kind of deal with today that you feel like would have been different if you had a father in the household? Because I know that's a lot of, that's a situation that sadly a lot of young men in America are going through.
Yeah, man, it was hard because you see potential in yourself in the absence of the validation, you know? So
Yeah.
like I didn't grow up making the best grades in school. And I know that's going to shock a lot of people, seeing the fact that like I went to the Naval Academy and then I went on to go to Rutgers to get my master's and then being a Hoover Veteran Fellow. But like I was never recognized academically, And at a certain point when I decided I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, somebody told me it wasn't happening. They said, you don't have the grades to get in and stuff, etc. And so that's where, again, I credit it to my mom, who she put the I believe button in me at a very early age, that anything was possible, and would always nudge me on that. But now that I'm older and I look back, one thing I'm very cognizant of now is being wary of labels that are put on you that you didn't put on yourself.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, it's something that I'm struggling with. I'm still working past these today. My coach calls it cutting the wires, because it's almost like this operating system has been put in you, and the terms at-risk youth, people like you don't belong here. pedigrees and all these different things, right? And so, we're going to get into it, but you end up having this kind of like imposter syndrome. And at the time, like, I think one of my superpowers is I'm just very driven, sometimes tunnel vision wise though, it's like I put a goal and I just freaking plow through, because if I stop to think about all that other stuff, it's only going to slow me down. But growing up, like I did not have the confidence, and I would just say to myself, first of all, you got to surround yourself with the right people. And I know that sounds cliche,
Absolutely.
but they call me Iron Mike. So I got to say iron sharpens iron, but it's so true, because this theme, even today's episode is about normalizing excellence. When you're around other people that aspire to, be the best or are pushing themselves, it's going to rub off on you. But sometimes you just got to see that, right? Now I was very lucky early on that, like, again, I had my mom there. So she held me to a higher standard than a lot of other kids. They didn't have a standard,
That's sad. Yeah.
But, surrounding myself, iron sharpens iron, seeing what's possible. And I think the other thing too is, and I deal with this in Newark, right? So if you would have told me before I moved to Newark and a kid had it rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of pat him on the back. It's okay, man. You got this, et cetera, et cetera. And there's still a little bit of that, but I really don't jump in and save too many people. I try to empower them to save themselves by teaching them how to accept their current reality. Admiral Stockdale talks about the Stockdale principle. I think, Jim Collins coined it the Stockdale paradox, where you accept your current reality, accept the brutal facts of your current reality, but have faith that things will work out in the end. And sometimes we're in these environments where it seems so impossible, like it's a Herculean lift to get into the Naval Academy or go to college anywhere, to hit that score on the SAT. But accept your current reality. It's like, hey, you might not be where you want to be yet, but if you keep showing up, you keep doing the work, and you have faith that things are going to work out long run, that belief, that triumphs everything. And so I try to empower kids in my immediate circle to just kind of, hey, I know life is hard. I know you don't have all the resources and, you don't have a lot of money and stuff, et cetera, but it is what it is,
Yeah.
I know that sounds harsh, but it's truth, because for us out here in this world, man, especially me and you being entrepreneurs, nobody's saving us. It's hard.
Yeah. And I also think, having the ability to show up every day and follow a course of action when you don't see an immediate result is something that is really going to be a defining factor in whether you achieve like excellence or whether you stop before you see it. So I think like you put it perfectly. Like you got to see your current circumstances, number one, and oftentimes they're not going to be great. And then number two, you got to decide that you're going to deal with those set of facts and make a plan, even though you don't have certainty of outcomes, which, that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. And I can definitely say that I do feel the benefit of having male figures around, because even in the absence of it, because I did it the hard way, right? I didn't have any. And, when I was going through the infantry officer course in the dead of winter, when I was in Afghanistan in the dead of winter, right? That softness was kind of ripped out of me.
Mm.
And then I become an entrepreneur and you get punched in the face as an entrepreneur, right? And part of you's like, dang, man, I wish I would have had that tension when I was younger. I wish somebody would have kind of instilled that in me when I was younger. And I'm still where I am today, because of my family and the support that they put around me. But I definitely, like, there's a certain kind of toughness, I think, that I missed out on by not having that father figure in the house, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. And, it's someone that, I grew up in a 2-parent household, and sometimes it's not that, you have like a dad that's just telling you, hey, you need to be tough and not have any feelings and you just need to suck it up. But it's your dad as a male, your dad is giving you your default settings of how you approach problems. And like you kind of hit the nail on the head with confidence. Like seeing my dad being, a successful pastor, which all pastors are entrepreneurs, but he was a full-time pastor, and most pastors have to work, a job and then come to pastor because most churches aren't large enough for you to do that as your day in and day out job. But kind of seeing the way he approached that subconsciously gave me a set of kind of like a default principles of how to approach life successfully. And, something that I hope, other young men can have, even though, a lot sadly aren't able to, experience that.
And I have to imagine, at least having your dad in the house had to provide a certain level of benchmarking. So you knew what was possible for you. You had something to look up to. Whereas for me, I didn't know, it was it's like Star Wars. It's like the future's blurry, and I think that's even what they kind of hint at in like the movie is like, you don't know what you're going to become. You don't really have anything to benchmark off of. You've got all these kind of different, you've got coaches, you've got pastors, you've got teachers and stuff, etc. But at the same time, you don't have that one definitive to kind of look up to and be like, I can be like that. I want to be like that. And so throughout my life, you're kind of journeying, and it's unfortunate, right? Is you start to put people in a father figure role that it's not that though. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you got to have the mental awareness to separate that and be like, this is my teacher. This is my coach. This is my X, Y, and Z. Uncle Phil, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There's a lot of stuff online where people say like, people don't know how many kids Uncle Phil raised, because we were living vicariously through, Will Smith, you know what I mean? Looking at Uncle Phil and some of these other television characters that represent the father figure kids like me didn't have.
Yeah. And I guess to kind of wrap it up, when you say like you look at other people and then you got to realize, no, this is a teacher, and no, this is a coach, or even this is an uncle. The thing about having a father that's yours is it's a certain level of ownership and commitment that most of the time only somebody that's their blood and that's their DNA is gonna fulfill. And I guess if you don't have that and you look for it in someone else, they can be like a fractional father in certain instances. But, like growing up, if my dad said he was gonna pick me up from, football practice, like it was there. Honestly, growing up, it was a shock to realize how many people didn't keep their word because, my dad said he would do something, it's not even a question. So, kind of like that level of certainty, I think it can't be understated, in the ability to have that growing up. But if you're okay with jumping to a theme that we have of normalizing excellence, where did that come from? And I guess at what point in your journey post-military, did you feel like, excellence was something that you had to normalize? And I guess like what kind of brought that about in you?
So excellence is one of my favorite words. It's one of my favorite words because to me, it represents an aspirational identity. It's not that you're guaranteed to get there, but it's something that you're like striving to get to. And, I have this term called uncommon humans. And the first time I got exposed to uncommon humans was at the Naval Academy. You're sitting in the classroom and, one of your classmates got like papers all over the place and he's like sitting in the back of the class and stuff, etc. But then you come to later find out that he's like graduated #1 from the Naval.
Absolutely.
And he's like captain of the hockey team, and and then he's going to go off and be a Navy SEAL or pilot or something like that. And he's like also an aerospace engineer. Absolutely. And then he go on Rhodes Scholar and all this other stuff, right? I had, in the environment I grew up in, I didn't get exposed to that. You know, I was in regular classes, but because my mom was an administrator at my high school, and I said I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, she knew how important it was to get that AP on your transcript. And so she was able to get me into AP classes, even though technically I didn't have the grades for it, and I didn't really know much about AP in the first place. But that classroom was radically different than the classroom that I was in previously, you know? And I got a little whiff of it there. But when I got to the Naval Academy, it was kind of like the next level. And so then once you start getting exposed to these things and you move out through your career, you know, being an infantry officer or, you know, graduating the academy in general, people are getting out, going to get their MBAs, they're going to grad school, and they're going all these different things. And you can feel a little bit of imposter syndrome too, you know, because part of you is like, man, these guys are so special, that, and ladies, and what do they have that I don't have and stuff, etc. And so rather than kind of feeling like the woe is me kind of mentality, I start to try to mimic the behaviors of people I aspired to be like, habits from here, habits from there, etc. And it was really me about kind of taking ownership of this concept of excellence and what it means to be excellent. And even though I might not always feel it inside, I'm going to strive to achieve that. And then the concept of normalizing excellence is sometimes you just need to see other people or be exposed to other people to know certain things are possible. So for example, when I was at the Naval Academy, I made up my mind I wanted to be an infantry officer, but I didn't see any infantry officers that looked like me.
Yeah.
And the first two African-American infantry officers I met, Cedric Jefferson and Maurice Chapman, I remember when they walked in to Dry Dock, which was the restaurant we had at the Naval Academy. And these were like my superheroes. You know, I might as well have seen LeBron. But and I already, again, you already know it's possible within you, but you just kind of hit the I believe button. You hit the I believe button, but then you see it and it's boom, you know? And, or, you know, when I was at an entrepreneur event a couple years ago, and, you know, it was by the Institute of Veteran and Military Families, and it was held in New Jersey. And they had a session about growing a scaling a venture. So I walk in that session, and there's like 4 PhDs that look like me.
Wow. Yeah.
Instantly, what do you think I want? I want a PhD.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, because just kind of getting exposed to that. And so to kind of bring it all full circle, it's just an aspirational identity. It's so powerful to me because we all know how hard it is to, you know, keep striving in the face of like constant adversity, you know, but it's just a way to think about kind of life and pushing ourselves.
And I think one of the things that I pointed out from what you said about, you know, normalizing excellence is not the times that you don't like get to it where you use that to define you, but like you're a boxer. If you're in the fight and you're trying to be excellent, eventually it's going to become a habit, and it's not going to be a steady state. It's always a fight, but the ability to wake up every day and keep fighting to be excellent seems to be like a part of your character and almost like a part of your DNA.
Yeah. And the other thing was, it's all nice and dandy to talk about this when we're sitting in, you know, the ivory towers at these nice schools and whatever. Yeah. But like when you're building a venture from scratch, you know, and you're walking around like confident, you know, acting as if, people looking at you like you're crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, you ain't got no customers. You know what I mean? You're going from 0 to 1. But that's not, you know, that doesn't mean that we have to show up raggedy. You know, that doesn't mean that we have to, you know, not try our best. And so it's, yeah, man, I don't know. It's just a powerful concept to me. And I think it's something I want to write about more. But it's just, I don't know, man. I think for me, again, when I think about my background, I really didn't hear the word excellence. Like nobody really pushed me that way, you know, but being at the Naval Academy, being exposed to so many amazing humans, you know, people that are doing great things in the military, out of the military and stuff, etc. I just decided I wanted what they had. And it's crazy to say this on this platform when y'all are probably looking at us. You're like, both y'all went to the Naval Academy. You both veteran fellows. Like, what are y'all talking about people had? But we know imposter syndrome is real, And when you grow up with a chip on your shoulder, and that's what I'm struggling with now, Greg, is letting go of the chip.
Yeah. And when you kind of dive into the imposter syndrome, when you're doing what, when do you feel the imposter syndrome? And then the chip on your shoulder, I guess, is how it presents. So what situations do you feel the imposter syndrome? And then in your actions, how does that present?
So I have a peak performance coach. Her name is Melissa, and I meet with her at the start of every week on Mondays.
Yes.
And I was telling Melissa, like, so much of what we do, especially at this age, I'm 37, I do a lot of things off of instinct, but that instinct has been built up over time, So whether I come up with a plan and then I start executing the plan and then I trust the plan. When I am off, I start second guessing everything. It's like, why am I going down this rabbit hole? Did I make a mistake? And sometimes it can be something simple as trying to get a new client, or, it's been a while since you've got clients, because I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. I do business coaching. I do a bunch of other things, or even a funder for Ironbound, right? It just feels like the world is squeezing on you and everything is hard and you don't feel confident. It's like the opposite of beast mode, essentially. That's what she said. She's like, when you're feeling like that, you're not feeling like you're in beast mode, versus when, I'm hitting everything, get that workout in the morning. I'm feeling good, challenges that are coming up, right? It's like, it's not throwing me off my game because I'm focused, I'm executing, but it's like two different kind of feelings. But when I'm not feeling, super confident and I still have to show up, that imposter is in my ear. It's like, you don't have an MBA, I think there's an author, I forgot her name, psychology, she calls it parts, where sometimes we will be stuck from something that happened in our childhood that we're still carrying with us today. So like that teacher that tells you you're not good enough to get into the Naval Academy, then you're in a situation and you get rejected for something. Now that's taking you back, despite all the progress you've made, despite your age, with a single word or phrase, somebody has kicked you back, 30 years. And so it's that, and being aware of that, anytime I'm operating at the edge of my own competency, where I'm having to constantly having these mental talks in my head. You got this, Mike, you got this.
Yes. And so, I think we haven't delved into Ironbound, but Ironbound is a not-for-profit, and you interact with youth in Newark, New Jersey, and you teach them boxing. But also, I know not being confident in a boxing match can get you hurt.
Correct.
And so for let's say you have a new person that comes into Ironbound and they want to learn how to box, but they're not a boxer. How do you get them to overcome their imposter syndrome to be able to perform in the ring when you have quote unquote live rounds coming at you?
So I think that's what's so powerful about boxing, particularly for the young men and women that we serve, because, how many people can play on a basketball team? Like 15, maybe?
Yeah.
Then you talk about football and track and some of these other sports. But in Newark, New Jersey, where Ironbound Boxing is located, you got 50,000 kids running around. There's not enough programs for them. And think about the kids that are not going to be playing basketball, running track, etc. And, I was not a star athlete growing up. So I didn't have people in my ear telling me I'm great, pumping me up, etc. And I definitely wasn't getting it in the classroom. So where did that confidence come from? Grace of God, essentially, right?
Yeah.
But in Newark, you got those young men and women, they're in the same situation. They're living in the projects, right? They may or may not come from a 2-parent household. Finances are tough, right? And then now they're having to go through life in the same thing, not really getting it done in the classroom. They are searching for confidence. And what we do with Ironbound, that kid walks in the gym, they might not know how to box and stuff, etc. But it's like that analogy I gave at the beginning. Who does the boxer represent? You know, what does it mean to be a champion, right? That is an aspirational identity a lot of these kids were looking for. They didn't know jack about boxing, but they know if I go in a boxing gym, I might get what they have. That's the same thing that led me to box at the Naval Academy. I wanted what they had, right? That Naval Academy boxer, that brigade champ, etc. So you help kids get confidence through small and incremental progress. You know, they come in one day, they can't even keep their hands up. Then you teach them the basic boxing stance. Then you teach them a couple little things, and now they start to make progress, et cetera, and it's addicting. And then they get used to making progress, right? And then you go from never boxing to now they're sparring for the first time. And then they get better at sparring, they get more confidence. Now they want to get their first boxing match, right? So it's like a building process, right?
And one of the cool things you said was they get used to making progress. And going off the theme of normalizing excellence, would you almost say excellence, because excellence is an abstract term, but would you define the verb of excellence as getting used to making progress? Or is that not how you view it?
No, I think there's definitely a progress to it. But maybe even with that, right? It's like success, right? How do you define success for yourself? You know, especially as an adult, when you ain't getting on panels and the days are over of the medals and the shiny objects and stuff like that. Like, you don't get rewarded for doing your job, essentially. Some people do, but for most of us, right? We get up every day, we attack it, and sometimes the only people that know how hard we work, or the only people that recognize our efforts, are our immediate family and team members, etc. And so for a lot of listeners out there trying to define what success means for you in your professional career, in your business, with your project, it's on you. Just like excellence. It's like, what does excellence mean to you? I know what it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not getting up for the kids. It's not going to the gym. It's not doing your road work. It's not skipping, your nutrition and your meals. It's not listening to your coach. That's the opposite of excellence, So I think it's a little bit abstract, but I will say, I know it also gets a bad rap at times because it feels like, I don't know, sometimes people, if you throw excellence around people, it almost feels like you're talking down to them, because people start to project and they start to look at themselves and what they don't have, and it can seem like you're kind of putting these people on a pedestal while you're thumbing your nose down at us over here.
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue into breaking the chain and kind of redoing the wiring in our heads. And so, I would assume if you are in a situation and you may feel maybe so distraught that you can't even have the concept of excellence being talked about around you because your circumstances are, you're just trying to make it to the next minute, to the next meal, to the next night. What are some tools and frameworks that you have as it relates to kind of breaking the chain of, maybe like we call it, the mundaneness or mediocrity?
Yeah, and I want to define even breaking the chain for a lot of people, because we're using a lot of lyrics that y'all might not have heard of, some music and stuff, etc. But it's essentially like dropping the chip. Breaking the chain is dropping the chip on your shoulder. Like, nobody cares. So what? You're grown now. All that stuff that happened to you in childhood, for a lot of us, it's like, you've had a lot of experience now, but still carrying this weight. And so, you talk about frameworks and stuff. Like, I think back when I was first moved to Newark. So I got to bring people up to speed on this, because I know we kind of start riffing, but I have to bring you all up to speed. When I was at the Naval Academy, I got exposed to the sport of boxing. And I became a 3-time national boxing champ, 2-time most valuable boxer, captain of my boxing team. And I tell people, I didn't win 3 national championships boxing a bunch of midshipmen. I spent a lot of time in inner city boxing gyms in Baltimore, DC, New York City. And the reality of the day was that the kids in these gyms did not have the same possibilities in life for those of us that were coming out of the academy. So in the Naval Academy, you box, but you graduate from a world-class institution, you serve your country as an officer in the military, and then you get out, start your own business, work in corporate America, go to grad school, etc. That is not normal in inner city amateur boxing. So when I graduated from the academy, after I served our country, I relocated to Newark, New Jersey, where I started the Ironbound Boxing Academy. And during that time, I was running a boys' home, essentially, at a private school in St. Benedict's Prep. At a private school in Newark called St. Benedict's Prep. I was a glorified house parent. So I ran a residence hall with 70 teenage boys, primarily Black and Latino, living in the heart of Newark, New Jersey.
Yes.
My peers, you know what they were doing? They were going to Harvard. They were going to Wharton, right? They're doing all this other stuff. And I'm getting knocks on my door at 12 o'clock in the morning, waking me up to go, put out some nonsense, right? And I was not printing money. I'm still not printing money. A drastically different world, And I just kind of had this vision in my mind that I want to start this, free amateur boxing program. And people would tell me, like, what are you doing? And this is early on, right? Like, Ironbound was like grassroots. We're still grassroots, but I'm talking about table and chair grassroots because we didn't have a boxing gym. I used the residence hall to train kids how to box. I trained them out front in the grass. I trained them in the residence hall and stuff, etc. So I'm hitting that I believe button because I have this vision of what's possible. But my immediate peer group, my peer circle, they didn't see the vision yet. They were just supporting me because of our background, our service together and stuff, etc. But I'm sure deep down, they were probably thinking like, yo, is Mike going through it?
What is he doing?
What is he doing? Over time, I approached the city of Newark about starting a free gym in town. I asked for a space. I said, if you give me a space, we'll outfit it ourselves. And that became, the Ironbound Boxing Academy. But like those early on messages, I'm telling you, the imposter syndrome was real. I felt like I was missing out on life, and I was really contemplating, like, did I make the right choice?
Yeah.
Because when you do go down this pathway, we talk about change makers, right? And so this is who we're going to be targeting, a lot of on this podcast. Teachers, people working in, economic development, people working on the front line of health, right? These aren't always glamorous jobs, and people are getting older, and just the reality of what comes with that. Because sometimes you can be benchmarking against other people in their professional careers. This person's making $500,000, $1 million plus a year.
Yeah.
And you're over here working in a, classroom somewhere, right? Those things are real, and, it affects people. And it's something that can be real challenging. But, thankfully, again, just hit an I believe button. And you fast forward now, 10 years later, people start to see some of the progress we made with Ironbound. The Dick's Sporting Goods Foundation, we've gotten support from the UFC and some of these others. I've been able to be on, national television a couple times, but that's later. Like that's 10 years down the line. That wasn't, those first couple years. And it was very, very challenging, to not, keep myself motivated.
Yeah. And I think one of the hidden things about, giving back is, and there's a book and a movie called Bonhoeffer, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer, 20th century theologian. He also, during World War II, returned to Germany because he didn't believe that what was going on there was right, and he ended up dying in a concentration camp. But he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, and basically he says like when you're called to do something great, basically oftentimes it kind of the requirement is death, but is sometimes that death isn't always like physical, but the nicest house, the biggest car, the most expensive, shoes and watch, to truly make a difference in people's lives. And being a son of a pastor, when you're making a difference, it doesn't always come with a rainbow and a pot of gold at the end of it. But when you typically, when people ask, hey, how's Mike? Or, they'll say, he's a good man, he's a decent man. And, that's kind of some of the best compliments that you'll get. So
Yeah, we call those
truly admirable.
we call those eulogy virtues, because I think a lot of times people can spend their careers trying to get clout on LinkedIn, right? They got all the different resume stuff, but at the end of the day, when you're dead and gone, that's not what people kind of talk about. They talk about the impact and stuff you made. And I think even a lot of people listening to this podcast, and people even interested in what we've been doing with the Veteran Fellowship program, they're going to be leaning more towards impact, because I think that's just something that I see with a lot of transitioning veterans. You get out of the military, you've been kind of very mission driven,
Absolutely.
right? Working on stuff bigger than yourself. And it's like, how do you kind of find that way, in the civilian world? But at the same time, people are getting out, they have families, they have kids, they have things that are responsible for. So staying true to yourself while also making sure like your basic needs are being met. And, everything was getting amplified, even going back to, what we were talking about before, because when I was building Ironbound, social media was already kind of out in existence. But think about over time, it was really taking off.
Yeah.
So you're constantly seeing what other people are doing, while you're sitting there, dealing with a disgruntled parent in Newark for a free program. For, you know what I mean? Like a free program.
For a free program.
Yeah, people call your phone all day, every day. You're like, is this it? Is this, this is what I signed up for? But I think it's just the reality of like what it takes, And I've had to, you talk about keeping a free boxing gym open in the middle of a global pandemic in Newark, New Jersey.
That has to be tough.
Talk about, nobody was coming. Newark was a ghost town. People think I call myself Iron Mike because of my accolades in the boxing ring. No, I start calling myself Iron Mike because I had to give myself a pep talk when the NBA got canceled, and I knew it was a wrap for Ironbound.
Yeah.
Businesses fell for primarily two reasons. Number one, no market need, which means no one's buying what you're selling. And number two, they ran out of cash. And virtually overnight, there was no market need for boxing anywhere. And the reality that we were going to run out of cash was very real. And at the time, my income was earned teaching boxing to companies in the New York City metro area. So I had a social enterprise, right? I had the for-profit model, on-site boxing classes in New York City, and the nonprofit, the Ironbound Boxing Academy in Newark. And so seeing both of those things just wiped out, man, it was very, very rough. And I had to give myself a pep talk, get up off the canvas, literally and physically, and get back in the fight. And I was able to do some things. I taught myself how to podcast, hence how we're here today.
Yeah.
I started helping other people podcast as a way to earn income for myself. And I got exposed to some different business models, profitable business models that I was able to grow in and serve the veteran entrepreneurial community, which I'm very passionate about now, helping what I call underdogs and misfits, enjoy and succeed in business while still, carrying that legacy forward with Ironbound Boxing.
Absolutely. And then you have a final concept that I want you to dive into. Talk about the gap and gain.
So Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. Dan Sullivan's this royal, business coach. He's been doing it for like 50 years, runs an organization called Strategic Coach. And then Benjamin Hardy, Dr. Benjamin Hardy is a writer, organizational psychologist, etc. They came together to write this book called The Gap and the Gain. And Dan Sullivan had been teaching this concept forever. And essentially what it talks about is sometimes we can ignore the progress we've made by focusing on the gap, which is we're here, but where we want to be, we're still not there yet. And it still seems so far away. And sometimes when you look at it and realize that, you can instantly fall into kind of some self-loathing instead of looking behind you and recognizing how far you've come. you know? When you think about even us right now being on this platform, when I think about where I came from, to be here today doing the things I'm doing, I would have never imagined in my life. I never imagined I'd be an entrepreneur. That wasn't even, like, I saw entrepreneurship growing up, but nobody called it entrepreneurship. It was just, to be quite frank, a bunch of failed businesses.
Yeah.
You know, you would see people in your family. My mom had a flower shop she was trying to do. She had some other stuff she was trying to do, but it was more survival mode. Anything else, it wasn't thriving. People were just doing stuff just to keep the lights on, pay the bills, and feed me and my sister. You know, I never viewed that as entrepreneurship. So, like, I didn't want no part of that. But versus kind of what I'm able to do now, it seems so, beats it, quite frank, impossible. And I had to remind myself that when, you know, even now, like, I'm recording this podcast in the co-working space in Harlem, you know, because the rally of entrepreneurships. I have a co-working space here. Not my fancy desk setup like I had before, mainly because, one, remote work is here. So I'm kind of moving around just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's like 6:00, you know, everybody's gone from the office. I'm here solo dolo getting this podcast done, you know, but that's the reality of what it takes to succeed as an entrepreneur. And I'm very blessed to be able to do this because, you know, I've gone through pandemic. Then we had, you know, I don't know, some people say it was recession or not. Now you got AI here taking jobs left and right.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, you're constantly kind of having to bobble and weave and stay in the fight. But I'm here.
And I also think one concept in the gap in the game is that there's a level of gratitude that you have from noticing that, I mean, you aren't where you started, right? And that should be gratitude. But looking forward is a level of faith and hope that, you know, you're going to get there one day. But what are your thoughts on how gratitude can be a tool that helps you appreciate where you are and motivate you to move forward?
Listen, I write in my journal every day 3 things I'm grateful for. 99.9999% of the time, I woke up.
Yes.
You know, I write that every day. I woke up to see another day because, sadly, even from our peers at the Naval camp, we've got people that are no longer here. You know, had people that didn't come back from Afghanistan with us, you know, family members. You know, I lost my uncle at the end of 2023. And, you know, he would always reach out to me on Veterans Day, you know, and when I, you know, even going back, my boxing matches, my freshman year, my sophomore year, my mom had a stroke. So she's been bedridden and paralyzed ever since I was a sophomore in college at the Naval Academy. Right. So when I was fighting and competing, I'm competing for the national championship, I had to find people to call that I could just talk to. When I came back from Afghanistan, right, didn't have that father figure to pick up the phone and call. You know, I had to call peers from the academy and stuff like that. And to still be standing here today, past all that, right, that's a huge accomplishment. You know, even more recently, I did something. And again, as for the listeners, you're going to hear a lot of stuff, you know, as we continue with this series. But last year, I completed a trip to Everest Base Camp. So I went to Kathmandu, completed the 9-day trek, got a photo I'll probably share with everyone. But that was so far away from anything I would have ever imagined growing up as a child, you know, and I completed that, and you can't take that away from me. I've also done Machu Picchu. I've done all these other things that are amazing. But again, I just have to remind myself and be grateful, you know, that I was able to participate in those things, that I took action on those things, that I got those things done. You know, even with the Hoover Institution, got to travel to Tbilisi, Georgia with my cohort. I would have never gone to Tbilisi. But again, that theme of normalizing excellence, ever since that trip, I keep pushing the limits of travel. Over the holidays, came back from Vietnam and Thailand. My first time going out there. But I'm so interested in seeing these other parts of the world just because I got exposed to it. And so that's my new normal, you know, and that wasn't always the normal. And so, yeah, just trying to practice gratitude in everything that I do.
Yeah. And I think the gratitude is such a big piece because even in America, and I know we have a ton of volatility at home, overseas, but even the gratitude to be in a country where your hard work can lead to a better outcome for you, your family and your community is something that I think no matter how much strife there is in America, is something that you have to be grateful for. Once you've, i.e., traveled to other countries and seen, how hard it is if you didn't grow up in the right class of people, there's no way for you to go from, being, an inner city kid to, become an Iron Mike. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
the gratitude piece is huge. And also on the health piece, and I grew up in church in the South, and when a old mother of the church would get up and say, I thank God for a reasonable portion of life, health, and strength. The older I get and you see, like life happens and, certain people you went to school with aren't here, or certain diagnoses that are things that people will have to battle until the end. And you just realize how blessed you are to have the opportunity to do a couple of things you said, like to fight, to try to be excellent, to try to, to break the chain of whatever we had to do, and our limitations from the past, and, to realize there's a gap and a gain and we've come far, but we still have a bright future ahead, and the gratitude can help us achieve that.
Man, 100%. And I hope our listeners out here, one of the reasons, again, we want to do this podcast is just kind of set the stage by introducing you all to me as the host of the series. Because, even what we talked about, this concept of normalizing excellence, I think we started with one, what is the reality of growing up without a positive male figure in the household? And you don't got to be a rocket scientist to see that a lot of young men and women, right, are lost out there. But particularly what's going on online, on these platforms with, and in any society, right, that's very volatile when you have a lot of young men lacking guidance, et cetera, et cetera. And so by some of the work I've been able to do in Newark, right, I can bring an interesting perspective and also my lived experiences of what that entails. But then also just kind of take off our armor a bit for those of you that are listening that are veterans that are kind of probably dealing with a lot of the stuff that we talked about that transition, staying the course when you're trying to be a change maker, when you're trying to do a social good for the community, and still keep the lights on, look after your family and stuff, etc. And also stay appreciative when it feels like, just this world of like constant uncertainty. And so we're real honored to kind of have you here with us on this journey. And again, we're just getting started. This is just episode 1, but I wanted to expose you all a little bit kind of where I'm coming from and some of the lens and the place I'm sitting, as I'm going to help to kind of guide some of these conversations. And I also know that a lot of you that are tuning in are either friends of the Hoover Institution or you're veterans that are heard about this program called the Veteran Fellowship Program, and you're interested in applying. And so we really want you to do so and want to encourage you to do so you can get exposed to other veterans like Greg and I, as well as, the amazing resources that the Hoover Institution provides through the Veteran Fellowship Program. And so we'll leave a link in the comment section. You can go to hoover.org/VFP and apply from there. But also, we'll have some more insights to follow later. But I think for this inaugural episode, I think we did a great job. For all you that are tuning in, we appreciate you. Until next time, peace, love. Have a great rest of your week.